Good morning. How is everyone doing? I hope you're doing well. This lecture today is going to be on the foundation of communication in English rhetoric. Rhetoric is what we say when we write, it's our message. And there's some very key points to that. Now, yes, you're going to have a quiz on this, but it goes so much farther than a quiz. It is about uh, not only just knowing it to where you memorize it and you understand the concepts, these are concepts that you need to really keep in mind when you are writing or when you're speaking. What you say is influential and people will take it and they will run with it. You are hearing rhetoric all the time. And we do one of two things when we're hearing rhetoric. We are either believing it or not believing it. We don't understand it. It could be, you know, we're taking it in and how we process it. It really depends upon your personal experiences and things of that nature. If someone is saying something, but your personal experience is like, I don't know about that. But the thing is with rhetoric is that I can tell you something and I could actually make you believe it. It can be a flat out lie, but it's something that I want you to get on board with. Sound familiar? We have it all the time. People love to share messages, but then there's a responsibility with that. What do we take with it? Do we just accept it because they say it in a manner that is engaging? Hitler was engaging. Hitler was a great orator, but he also had Joseph Goebbels as his right hand man. And Joseph Goebbels was the master of logical fallacies. And one of the his concepts, one of his strategies is you say the lie enough and people will believe it. And it's true. And so then you have to really think, okay, as the receiver, as the audience, because you are the audience at that point, are you just going to believe it because this person says it in a very engaging manner? Or are you going to do some research to seek for truth? And that's what we're always doing. What's the truth? Don't just hear it. You have personal experience. There are so many resources that are out there, studies that have been done, and we have to learn how to sift through that. So as we're moving on and getting into the lecture this morning, yes, I want you to take notes, but I really want you to kind of marinate on some of these concepts, and they're logical. And there is some responsibility with that. With that, it's really going to take me to those two R's and two C's that we were talking about in class. There's four concepts that we really need to keep in mind anytime that we're writing or speaking, getting ready to speak to other people in order to get, you know, to persuade, because really persuasion is a lot of it. It's to inform. There are four types of main essays. Persuasion is one of them. Expository, where you're just sharing something, you're giving someone instructions on how to do something. YouTube is famous for that. Love YouTube. People are telling you and showing you how to fix something. I think at one point or another, we've all used YouTube to teach us something. I learned how to sew last summer because of that. And there are a lot of great resources for that. And not only are you hearing what they're saying, but as you're doing it, it's proving that what they're telling you is accurate. Because at the end of the day, did you get your final product? So just kind of keep those in mind. I've already touched on one of these concepts, and it's being responsible with your communication. That means you're using credible sources. And not only when you're getting sources, are you reporting them accurately? Are you only taking pieces and parts? Because if you are, you have to be very careful with that, because that can change the message of the original intent. And so you need to be very careful with that. Reporting accurately, maintaining the intent of the author. There is this wonderful little thing called an ellipsis, just three little dots. And you will use them, and you can use them effectively, because sometimes you are just using a piece of it. But if you are going to condense something, you still have to maintain the integrity of the intent of what the author was saying. And you can use a verbal ellipsis, or you can use the physical where you're seeing it in your writing, where you're doing those three little dots. The news, they'll take one piece of it and communicate it. But then how often do we hear, oh, that wasn't the whole story? Well, they took out the ending, and usually it's not always the same. And so we have to be responsible with our communication. Again, we're always seeking for truth. You don't want to be that person who's known for somebody who leads people astray. And how often in history has that been proven? What do you want to be remembered for? Someone who reports accurately, writes accurately, that you made an influence and an impact on our world and society because of the research that you've conducted, and that you've reported accurately based on all the research that you have conducted, either through doing experiments, surveys, statistics. I love statistics because it really does give a flair. We will talk about that later in the semester, because you can manipulate that. So again, you want to make sure that there's everything that you're doing, there's nothing that's untoward, that could be misleading, that could send people down a path. And sometimes it could be a dangerous path when you jump on those bandwagons. The second one is respectful. And we did talk about this in class. Um, and again, I feel like in this time in our history where people love to sling names or guilt or manipulate, if someone calls you a name or there's name calling, it stops the conversation. And you see, in my first one is the purpose of academic writing and rhetoric is to continue the conversation. The moment that you have insulted someone, or you are trying to purposely manipulate them, eventually it will come out. Then you've stopped the conversation. No one is going to want to hear what you have to say. They may hear that first time, but any follow up, if you've been proven that that you were insulting, you're trying to manipulate or anything like that, conversation stops. And you're never going to move forward. We need to continue to move forward. And that means sometimes that we are having to actually listen to something that you may not be in agreement with. Unfortunately, today, when people are not in agreement, they just totally count you off. They insult you. You're stupid. You're uninformed, blah, blah, blah. But really, are you? Because you asked the question for clarity? No, that's not on you. That's on them. Because if they're not willing to listen to your viewpoint, and there could be something there that maybe you didn't know. And so we've got to learn how to be respectful. We got to listen. Do we have to be in agreement? No. Listening and being respectful is not being in agreement. And I need for you to hear that, because that's such a message that's being pushed these days. If you don't agree with this, well, then you're this. It's a sexist, a racist, is whatever that looks for. And people don't like to be called names, and and they're going to be shutting down. You're guilting people, and it's almost a bully situation, and no one likes a bully. And the thing is that you shut down, conversation ends, or you become that person who falls in line with whatever they're saying, and you're down this long road of being manipulated, and you've created a message, or now you're believing something that you haven't even researched. So please be respectful. The moment that you insult your reader, and it comes in a couple different ways. Your in your face one is when somebody calls you stupid, or you're ignorant, or blah blah blah. Nobody likes that. But there's inadvertent ways when you are saying, well, obviously, um, everyone believes this. When those are actual, what we call logical fallacies. And we are going to get into that next week. We're going to actually get a lot deeper into that and really seeing how they affect message. And by using those, it can be very off-putting and insulting to the reader. So remember that once you've insulted your audience, conversation ends, folks. Knowing everybody, if you dig your heels in, both sides, because of insults or manipulation tactics, conversation ends. And then at the end of the day, you failed because you were not continuing the conversation. You were not uh, trying to engage in discourse. It could be that you listen to them, but you are coming with them with facts, and in a respectful manner, you can share that information. And then then you have that back and forth where there is a deeper understanding, and you can move forward. We've got to learn how to have discourse, respectful discourse with one another. And um, and it's so important because I feel like there is a lot of divisiveness where people are just digging in one side or the other. No one's listening to one another, and depending upon who they are, a lot of people can get hurt from that. So be very respectful. You want to be clear with your communication. Now, clarity can affect your message because if you are not writing it in a manner in which you've intended, um, then people are going to make assumptions of what you're trying to say. You never want to put yourself in a position where you're having someone else fill in the gaps, because more often than not, they're going to fill in those gaps with something that had nothing to do with what you actually were trying to communicate. And in this, there are some strategies with that clear communication. You have to use correct grammar and punctuation. We talked about that example in class. Let's eat, Grandma. You're inviting Grandma to lunch. But by taking out that comma before Grandma, and you say, let's eat, Grandma, you now went from an invitation that she's now the main course in the course of just and how often, by not using punctuation, by not phrasing things correctly, it can literally change the message of what you're trying to say. There are so many resources that are online, and everyone is in a different place as far as how they use grammar. Um, and sometimes it doesn't matter how long you've been writing, how long, I'm an English teacher. There's still some times where I'm looking at something and I'm like, if something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. So one, I'll look something up just to see how that's phrased. If what I'm reading and it's really not fixing, I'll just rephrase it. There's more than one way to say something. That's a part of revision, and that's okay. Again, sometimes we write something, and when you're writing, a lot of times we're just trying to get our thoughts out. That's why you have to go back and you have to edit your work to make sure that what you're writing is being received in a manner that what you intended it to be. And that's grammar, that's vocabulary. Vocabulary is that it's reflecting the audience that you're speaking to. If I am speaking to high schoolers, now I'm going to use some words because one, I'm an English teacher, but I'm constantly trying to grow your vocabulary, but I'm going to define myself. You'll hear through context, but I'm not going to start a lecture and just use a ton of big words and concepts that my audience is not familiar with, unless I'm using that as an opportunity to break concepts down. But I'm not going to make an assumption that they know all of that. So you got to think of who your audience is. Now, the other side of that spectrum is if I was speaking to other educators that we have kind of like that same background, I'm going to use different vocabulary, different concepts, because I know they can relate to that. So who's your audience? Write in the manner that is going to speak to that audience so they are hearing what you're trying to say. Spelling. One, if you don't spell things correctly, that actually hits your credibility and your, especially as something that's writing, because, once it's out there, and that represents you. And we're going to talk a little bit after I finish this to, what are those 3 strategies when you're writing to make sure that you can get those errors. Remember, when you're writing, a lot of times, especially if you're in the middle of a paper, our brains are amazing and we will auto correct. We know what we're trying to say, and, maybe perhaps we're not seeing that. So you always want to go back and edit your work to make sure that it really reflects what you're trying to say, and that it would be received in the manner in which that you intent of it. That last piece of it, what your parts of speech are. Use your parts of speech correctly. That actually is a horrible sentence. What's your parts of speech? Use your parts of speech correctly. I'm actually going to change that word. Well, it's not letting me. This is the first time I've used whiteboard, so doesn't know that. Uh-oh. Okay. I did not mean to underline all that. All right. So some people, they like to impress by using big words, and that's great. I love the English language. We are a melting pot language. I feel like we have the best of all the languages because we've extracted so many words and things from other languages, that we really have this robust language where there's so many words that we could use in order to really create what we're trying to, um, this communication piece. And that's great, and I want you to do that. That's what the I can't even say the word thesaurus is for. You can go on Google and say, what's another way to say da 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 da. You've got these great resources. Use them, and it really takes no time at all. But this is what I find is that, um, we've all had those people that will use these big words, but they're using them incorrectly, or they're not using them in the part of speech that it really should be. If it's a noun, you don't use it as a verb. If it's a verb, you don't use it as an adjective. You have to use them correctly, and you have to use them in context. Remember that language has evolved. And the one word that, I think is repair. Now, as an English teacher, and I've taught in high school, obviously I'm teaching lit, and I usually teach historical lit. I always go through it, and when we're doing vocabulary, I was like, you need to go into the reading to find out what the context clue is. And yes, it's very important, because that will put you in the realm of, when you do look that word up, what it was meaning in that time period. So if I said repair to you, most of you are going, well, it's like to fix something. But that's not what that word has always meant. They would repair to another room. That means they are going from one area to another. And so, also be careful with that. If someone is using it in that context, you say, well, they're not, they're stupid. They're not even using it right. Are they? Because that is one of the definitions, and that is how they would use it. And that if they're using it as a means of, the women repaired to the, sitting room, where the men repaired to the dining room to have drinks afterwards, that is used correctly. So making sure that you're using it correctly. Look it up. Don't just go to your thesaurus and just pick out a word. Also make sure that you're using it correctly in the sentence. It does look bad on you, because there's going to be people that know what that word means. If you don't know what something means, please look it up, and please make sure that you're using it correctly and spelling it correctly. And on that note, as far as spelling, when you are utilizing other resources, and that's really what research is that you're going into other resources, um, and you have to give props to where you have, retrieved this information. Please make sure that you are spelling the author's name correctly. Please make sure that if you are writing in the title of the source that you have, that you spell it correctly. Those to me are, fixable things, but it really looks poorly on you if you're not fixing them because you're not paying attention to detail. That is an editing thing. When we're typing, on my keyboard, I had it changed, and I'm constant. Sometimes my space bar doesn't work, and it's just kind of crazy. Got to get a new computer. And so I have to purposely go back and make sure, did it, did I misspell something? Did I use the wrong homonym? There, and there. Those are so misused. When I'm typing fast, have I typed the wrong homonym? Yeah, I have. But I go back and I'm like, oh, and I got to fix that. Now, I'm an English teacher. So if I make that mistake, y'all are like, oh my gosh, she's an English teacher. She should know better. Yeah, but I'm also human. And to be human is to err. But that's why it becomes so much more important that it doesn't matter what level of education you are, we're all going to make mistakes. The difference is, are you willing to take the time to go back to make sure that your writing reflects who you are? And I can tell you this, if you are in a hurry, and I can tell you this from my experience, every time that if I am in a hurry and I am trying to push something out because my deadlines are, hitting, um, I'm going to misspell something. Something will be not phrased because in my head, I'm kind of revising as I'm writing. What if I didn't take out the part that I was revising? That's happened. I know I've done it. I've seen where people have done it. I could tell that they were in the middle of revising, but they didn't go back before they hit submit to make sure that they cleaned up their work. So be very careful with that. That last piece is concise. That is so weird. To be with concise, get to the point. Now, this is the one thing that I like about academic writing. Academic writing is you just kind of get in, you do your job, and you get back out. This is not a novel. In a novel, one, you don't tell the ending because you want people to read your story. There are a lot of different components that make up creative writing that you have to do, which means you're describing things, you have to keep some interest, and you have to keep, you'll throw in detail that will get someone's attention to keep them reading. Academic writing is really not that. Academic writing is that you have a specific topic that you're writing on. You're showing your evidence and you're giving your outcome. So even where, like, as far as phrasing is concerned, that would probably be the closest to creative writing that you will pull into academic writing, but you really want to get to the point. I can tell you this. I don't know if any of you guys have ever, when you're scrolling through social media and you see an article and you pull that up. Now you get the title of the article grabs your attention. You're like, oh, that's great. And then you start reading the article, and then they go into all this background that had nothing to do with what you wanted to read. And then at the very end, if you get there, because I'm the type of person, if you don't get to the point, I'm not gonna read it, or I'm scrolling to find what it is. And if you wait until the last quarter of whatever you're writing is to get to the point of which you had already stated in your title, you're gonna lose that person's attention. And the fact is it makes me not want to read you anymore because you've put your name to it, and that's the type of writer that you are. And I want, it was a waste of my time that I can't get back. And one of the things, it's kind of like a little side. When I see those articles, there's always comments. I always go to the comments because sometimes people are like, okay, here's a gist of it. But, it's funny because people are like, I can't get back that 20 minutes of time that I just read. That's a ding on you. That's not saying a whole lot about you. Is someone, if you feel like you've wasted someone's time. And so with academic writing, we really don't want to waste someone's time. We really want to get to the point. Okay. It has to be logical. Be logical with what you are writing about. Okay. You know, I think the other day we talked about my trip to Walmart. I was in the line, I was buying something, and I was grabbing my keys to walk out the door. As I was pushing my cart around, I stopped and I had some conversation with people. And then I'm walking down my sidewalk to get back into my house to put my purchases away. I'm totally out of order. I've confused you. And if I have confused you, then I failed in that form of communication. We're logical creatures, whether or not we want to continue with that or not, but we are logical. And when we're trying to learn something, we need steps. Remember, as the writer, you are leading the reader, your audience, on that journey to communicate your findings. Do not confuse them because you are jumping all over the place. And this translates in a couple things. Okay, when we were doing our outline the other day, and which is so important, use an outline. That's use an outline. Make sure that when you use that outline, this is driving me crazy. That's the place where you're organizing your information. And When we got to the body paragraphs and next to the Roman numeral, you were kind of like writing your rough topic sentence, what that paragraph is going to be about. All that information, all those like ABCs, that's your evidence that supports that topic sentence. When you're looking at your outline and you're looking at the evidence, is there any piece that you've written there that really doesn't fit? Because if you keep that in there or you put something that doesn't relate to the topic sentence of that paragraph or the purpose of that paragraph, it's what we call an abrupt shift. And so I'm reading along, it's grooving, it makes sense, it's an easy read. And then all of a sudden, something random is thrown in there. It's now taking my attention away. You've confused me. I've had to read it a couple times. You stopped the flow of reading, which means you stopped that engagement with the audience. It's going to take them some time to get back in and kind of follow with what you're doing. Tangents. I know we do that a lot when we speak. And in everyday conversation, yes, that happens. But when you're writing and you actually have this time to sit down and make sure that your thoughts are together, make sure that all your stuff jives. Remember, with paragraph writing, you shift a topic or a focus, you make another paragraph. And I'm going to give you an example. Discussion boards. On your discussion boards, I've given you some prompts, and they're not necessarily all related, are they? So the moment that you shift to discuss another aspect of what I'm asking for, that really should be in another paragraph. Discussion boards are opportunities to write and to fine tune and to practice. Start using those techniques and getting in the habit of, all right, I'm shifting a focus. I need to move on. The other part that we were talking about is a rhetorical triangle. And this, again, is so key to effective communication. We talked about the triangle. We talked about the structure and how strong that structure is. The pyramids of Egypt, they've been around for thousands of years. There's something to it, okay? But we also discussed that if, let's say, I took this piece out of it. Oops. Oh, yeah. Why is it not doing what I want it to do? If I took a piece out of the structure, what happens to the structure? The structure fails. This side will collapse, which means now you're missing something, and that message that you had is not necessarily an effective message because you're missing a piece of it. And they all bring something different to the table. Okay. Now, on the rhetorical triangle, in your textbook, it actually has the rhetorical triangle, and I think it has ethos somewhere down here. I always put ethos at the top of my triangle because your credibility and your ethics are extremely important. Your name is important. Your reputation is important. Now, ethos is really kind of a twofold thing. I've always looked at it as it's the ethos of the author, it's the ethos of the research, it's the ethos of the communicator of that research. And so there's ethos isn't just this one-sided concept, and same thing with pathos and logos. That with these, you really need to look at it from all angles. So the credibility, let's start with the ground floor, or what I've affectionately called our grunt work. When you're using sources, are they credible? Could you fact check them for accuracy? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's certain things that we take into account, and we talked about those in class about credibility. Do they have a degree in what they're talking about? Do they have extensive research and extensive experience in that particular area? Now, in that instance, do they have to have a college education? Not necessarily. If you were a missionary or somebody who's been living in a different country for 20 some years, do you think that they're credible with telling you about what that country is like? Yeah, unless you've been living under a rock. But they are a credible resource and a first person resource. And there's actually two types of sources. There's primary and there's secondary. Primary sources, and you do need to know the difference of this. Primary sources are first generation. That means that person has done the research. This is their work. They're writing on it. If I am writing an autobiography about myself, I am a primary source because these are my thoughts. This is my story, and nobody can change that. That's mine. I did that. And that if they are a primary source, this is their research, their findings. But those of you who are going into sciences, you probably will be doing some type of research at one point or another in your career. And you would be considered a primary source because that was you from conception, that this was your idea. You created all of this data, you've done all this research, and now you're presenting it. That's a primary source. Your secondary source is your biographies, where someone is writing a biography on someone else. They're researching other types of sources in order to get that information on that person. And sometimes that can be a little dangerous because, what if something is inaccurate on that? But again, you're looking at your sources. So, primary and secondary are very important. And if you really look at it that way, primary sources, when you say that, that's probably a little bit more accurate. If this is a first generation, this person was there, this is what they're writing about. Primary sources, if you were doing historical research, diaries are an amazing resource. Even something as simple as the household ledgers, you are seeing real time what these people were doing at that time. That's a primary source. And you can utilize that because this is what they were doing. These are their diaries. This is what's happening day to day. I love that type of research. A little side note on that. That's why you learn cursive writing, because guess what? Everybody wrote in cursive back then. And if you don't learn cursive and you're unable to read cursive, then you are really cutting out a wealth of information. Um, thousands of years of information because people have been writing longhand for a long time. So ethos is extremely important. If your facts and your stuff, or the information, your research is not accurate, it really hits your credibility. And that's the other piece of ethos, is that, okay, I've done this research. If I'm using credible sources, and that will help with my credibility. But if I am using things that really are not accurate, or I'm using hearsay, well, such and such said, I went on Instagram and this is what this person said. Is that really accurate? Or is it their opinion? And we have to be very careful with that. The other piece is pathos. Now, a lot of people, they look at this passion and engagement. Why is that important? Well, I can have really credible sources and I can have great information, but if I communicate it in a dull manner where it's just, it's like me just reading the textbook to you in a class. You're gonna check out on me probably a couple minutes in if you give me even that long. So it's how you're sharing that information. How is it being shared with you? Remember, you want people to read your writing. If their eyes are rolling in the back of their head to, a paragraph, and they're not going to read your writing. Where's my example with that? This week, you were supposed to find that article, that peer-reviewed article on a topic that deals with your future profession or something that you're interested in. And what was one of the things that I told you to do? There were millions of articles that are on that online library. If you are reading it and you are not engaged with it at all, and you're wanting to go to sleep, you're yawning, you're now thinking about what you want to eat for lunch, there's no pathos there. It doesn't mean anything to you. You're not engaged with it. There's no engagement. You want people to read what you're writing. You have something valuable to say. If you're doing all this research, you have something to say, some outcome that needs to be heard. And I have to tell you, I've taught for a long time. I have learned so much from my students. I love to research, but through the course of discourse, I learn things because some people will pick up something that maybe I hadn't thought about or hadn't noticed. And that's what's so incredible about conversation and listening. And you're getting different perspectives. That's really cool. But if they're talking in a monotone voice, or it's just there's nothing there, you're not writing it in a manner that is engaging, or reading something that's engaging, then you've lost the pathos. And that, again, that form of communication has stopped. My last one, I call this my um, logos is your logic or your logistics. This is a part of your initial research when you're finding your sources. Statistics. I love statistics, especially depending upon what you're writing on. Um, when you're looking at data, long-term data is very important. If you're choosing a topic that's fairly new, you don't have enough history there for there really to be, um, viable research, uh, then it really becomes weak. When you have statistics or studies that have been done over years, you're getting a better feel for the accuracy of what it is. So if you're using stats or any type of studies that are very new, uh, it doesn't have as much punch and believability. You do need to know what these three bring to the table. You do need to know how to spell them correctly, including oratorical. Okay. We also talked about annotation. This is a part of your engagement with when you're doing research. You got these articles this week. It's active reading. Active reading is actually a part of annotation. And you do need to know what these are. Active reading is you're purposely reading something to gain a deeper understanding, a different perspective. You're seeking knowledge. If your eyes are just covering the words, that's not active reading. If you got to the end of a paragraph and you have no idea what was just said, you're not actively reading, and you wasted your time. And the sad part of that is a lot of people are like, well, I hate reading because it's boring. Well, if you weren't actively reading, if you weren't seeking something, of course it's going to be boring. You didn't get anything out of it. Oh, there's your pathos or your pathos. Isn't that something? It means a lot, doesn't it? So active reading means that there's something that you're engaging with. Again, I cannot stress when you are looking for material for any type of research project, make sure that there's that pathos there, that you're something that you can engage in. There's always an angle that you can get yourself interested in, but it takes some time, and that's why you don't wait till the last minute to do assignments. Annotation. I will always annotate. Anytime that I am going to have to do like a critique or a response writing on some written material, you want to really get that deeper understanding, and annotation is what provides that. That means that you are working with that material. So I've written down some things to be mindful of. Identify and define vocabulary or references used in the reading that you are not 100% sure what it means. You may have heard it, but if you really don't know what the context of it, go to Google, look it up. Okay. It doesn't take 2 seconds just to get a foundation. I'm not asking for a research, a dissertation on that. Just write something off. Make sure that you annotate on that material because it keeps it together. If you're writing on something else, there's something about it's separate and you're not going to piece it together as well. Underline vocabulary in the margin, because usually your margins really aren't that thick. I put a couple synonyms that will tell me what that word means. Then reread the sentence. Now that you have got the clues on it, reread it. It will mean something different and you will be able to understand it. There's your comprehension, folks. For those of you who comprehension is a challenge area for you, I would start that process of when you're reading, have a pen in hand, make sure it is a contrasting color, not black, blue, or pencil. For some reason, those colors kind of blend in and you don't really see or it's hard to identify what you've said, hey, I need to look at. I always do a different color. I don't do yellow because yellow's hard, but I'll do like a fuchsia or even an aqua, something that's going to be brighter. Purple, love purple, But when I am reading, I have a pen in hand. That way I'm underlining things that maybe it could be words, I'm defining them. Again, if there's a reference, they're referencing a person or a situation. If you're not 100% sure what that is, read it real quick. Go to Google. Write off something abbreviated to the side because you don't really have a whole lot of space to do that, but that can help you with that. Identify main points of the material. If you're having to do a response writing or a critique writing, you want to know what the main points that they're trying to convey. One thing I'll do is I'll underline the main, the abbreviate, just the phrase of what that main point is. And sometimes I'll even number them. Number one, I'll identify what the thesis statement is of that article. So that makes sure that, I know what I'm looking for when I'm trying to find those main points, right? And so the next time I hit a main point, I'm going to do number two. Now, underneath of those, I'm going to identify interesting facts underneath each one of those main points, things that stand out to me that I can relate with and that I understand. Things that are interesting that grab my attention. I'm going to identify that as well. Also, during reading, does something promote a question? I'm going to underline it. I'm going to put a little question mark. And depending on what my question is, I'm going to write that question out. Now, this is the fun thing. That's why you got to finish reading the article, because a lot of times they'll answer it. But make sure that your question, and if you're answering a question, if you're asking a question, that means you are actively reading and you are trying to gain understanding, but you need something else there. So write those questions out there. Make sure that you do all your annotations on the document you are reading. Use a contrasting color, just talked about it. Active reading. So those are kind of those main things that we're talking about. I do want to shift back into, so I'm going to close my whiteboard. And I'm going to go to your textbook. So this would be a great time for you to get that out. Doesn't matter if you're in the 4th edition or the 5th edition. The chapter 1 and 2 are the same. Page numbers may be a little different, but the main headings are pretty much the same. Please make sure also take some notes. Okay. So in chapter 1, academic writing, remember the purpose of academic writing is to continue the conversation and to make sure that you're continuing to move forward to gain deeper understanding. Doesn't matter how long you've been in something. I mean, I've been teaching for a long time. I've taught English for a long time. But I've always tried to posture myself as there's always something more for me to learn, something to fine tune. And I can tell you through my 15 years of teaching that I am not the teacher today that I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even a few years ago, because I'm constantly learning, constantly fine tuning, figuring out a different way to say it. They just come to life the longer that you're doing something. But if I was stuck in my head of like, oh, I'm the bee's knees. And unfortunately, I made that really bad mistake when I first started teaching college, where I felt like I had to be the smartest person in the room. That was a huge backfire moment and just really was not successful. So you'll see in chapter 1, you'll see a lot of the things that we've already talked about. Basically, academic writing entails making an argument. I will tell you this, anything that is bolded, you do want to know those concepts, folks. An argument is a text that is crafted to persuade an audience, often in the service of changing people's minds or behaviors. For the most part, it is kind of an argument. There's just some things that you are presenting your work, which is more expository in nature. When you write academic essays and it gives you those little bullet points to find a situation that calls for someone's response, demonstrate the timeliness of your argument, establish personal investment, appeal to readers whose minds you want to change, support your argument with good reasons. Does this sound familiar? Now, the last one is anticipate. Now, when we do get into an argument writing, we are going to delve a little bit deeper into that one, where you are anticipating what people may ask. And so you're answering the questions that haven't been asked yet. And that's actually a very smart thing to do. So when you are, will be your argument writing. Also, when you are doing your evaluations, anytime that you're presenting work, you want to really kind of think about what would someone ask. And one of the things that I do, you'll hear me say this again, but I'll go ahead and repeat it right now. Anytime that I get a topic to write on, one of the first things that I do, I want to think about it. We talked about that. What's your angle? What is it that you want to say? But the other piece that I will do is I will sit down and I will write and it could actually, before I really get into the thought process, because, kind of gives me some direction. But I'll sit down with a notebook and I will write the topic on the top line. And then I brainstorm. Now, I have put a an APA packet into your resource module. And that is a packet that I created, and it's teaching you how to write APA, how to set up an APA document, but it also talks about how to write a research paper along with it. And I have actually included that information in that packet. So I'm going to brainstorm. Now, this is the thing on brainstorming. All of you guys I know have probably done a brainstorming activity in a class at one point in high school, elementary, middle. Um, what that does is you are writing down whatever comes to your mind regarding that topic. And you give yourself, a while. I usually will go until I run out of things to say. But here's a couple things on that. When I am doing that, for one, I always write in a listing fashion. Do not write succinctly like in a paragraph format, mainly because I want to see those things as I've written them. And I'm going to brainstorm, which means now, again, I'm an English teacher, but when you're brainstorming, don't correct your spelling. You're not writing complete sentences. You're writing thoughts down. The moment that you stop to edit on a brainstorming activity, you've actually stopped your flow of thought. So you really want to just write everything that you have down, because this is not your final document. You're going to go back and edit it anyway. The main point of brainstorming is to get your ideas out. Okay. And even if it's duplicate, if it comes to your head, you write it down. If it comes to your head again, you write it down again, because you're going to always mark it out. Through that brainstorming activity, it will actually start to develop a direction. So when you are giving that thought process of whatever you're going to write on that topic or whatever that research paper is going to be on, now you've got some direction there. Okay. And it also, when you look at that package, you'll also see there's some strategies that I do with that will actually be the main points. And that could be points that you'll actually put in your paper in the body and for your support in order to present that information. What are the habits of mind of academic writers? Critical thinking, patterns, questioning, assumption, opinions. You're questioning assumptions and opinions. Question. That's an interesting thing. It's okay to question in a respectful manner. But if there's something in the back of your head that's like, this doesn't seem right, listen to that. Why is it not right? And then that's where you pick up the baton and then you start look into that to see really what it is. I'll never forget, I was in a conversation with someone. Now, I taught government a semester years ago when I was teaching high school, or for a year rather, not a semester, but I taught government for a couple of years, and I love teaching government. And so obviously now, did I have a major in government? No, but I enjoyed it. I'm a researcher, so I can, I want to make sure that whatever I'm teaching is accurate. And they were talking about the governor of Virginia and that they had 2 terms. And I'm like, I don't think, now I'm not going to insult because they were like on it. I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think it's just 1 term. And they kept going on and on and on. Now, remember I was telling you about your passion and someone can influence you? She just kept going on like she was right. And I'm thinking, I've taught this. I know that I'm right. But you know what? Because she kept going on and on, I started questioning myself. So when I got home, I Googled it. I was right and she was totally wrong. But the power of when people are just hammering you with a certain fact, you start to question yourself. But I went and made sure, looked it up. But now when I'm having discourse with that person, in the back of my mind, I'm like, they don't really fact check. And what she did, she got on a train of wherever she heard that, and before she fact checked. And so really, who was the person that failed in that form? That was her, because she did not have the ethos. She didn't have the credibility. She didn't do her research. She didn't have the logos. And so and that's just like you were at some function and talking. You're going to be in those situations, but there's a long lasting effect. And this happened years ago, and I still remember. What? Okay. There's 5 key habits of mind: inquiring, seeking and valuing complexity, understanding that academic writing is a conversation, understanding that writing is a process and that you're reflecting on it, Now, I'm not sure if the fifth edition really went into this piece of it, so I want you to make sure that you rewind this and you write those concepts down because you do need to know them. Inquiring, seeking and valuing complexity, that they're getting deeper into something, that it's just not something surface that they're just talking off the cuff. Understanding that academic writing is a conversation, understanding that writing is a process. Folks, it is a process. Um, First drafts are dangerous, folks. They're just dangerous. I would never submit a first draft just because, and without looking at it again to make sure that you've included anything. Even if, and I do strongly encourage you to do outlines because one, it puts all your stuff in order, but it also ensures that you don't forget something that needs to be in that paper. So use your rough drafts. But even when you use your rough draft and you get, or you use that outline to get it into your rough draft, you still need to go over it to make sure that you spell things correctly, you've used the right tenses, that you are consistent with past tense or present tense or whatever it is that you're doing. Making sure that you use the right homonyms. Those are like, I see those mistakes all the time. And I know you know the difference. And you know I know the difference. I better know the difference because I do this for a living. But does it mean I don't make a mistake? I'll totally make a mistake because I'm human. But gotta go back and edit. Academic writers make inquiries. What is that? That's your research. That's your asking questions to try to find answers. That's why those questions are really important. And when you're doing that brainstorming activity, write questions down that you have about the thing, about whatever that topic is, and answer them. That's a part of research. If you're coming up with that question, somebody else has that question. Okay. Inquiry typically begins with observation, then asking questions, and then examining alternatives. You want to read through that. And then at the end of that piece, it says steps to inquiry: observe, ask questions, examine the alternatives, explore how things could be different. And when you're doing critiques and response writings, depending upon what that is, that definitely can play a role. Academic writers seek the value of complexity. When we rely on binary thinking, imagining that there are only two sides to an issue, we tend to ignore information that does not fall tidily into one side or the other. And so that's actually a cautionary thing. There's not always two sides to a situation. There's not always two perspectives. And again, I'm going to go back to personal experiences, personal beliefs. There's always more than one way to see a topic. And sometimes, and I feel like sometimes I fall into the gray area where I can see and be in agreement with this piece of that, but I also see where someone else is coming and I can be in agreement with a piece of that. That's your synthesis writing, which we will be doing later on in the semester. But not everything is black and white. And if you put yourself and you position yourself in that way, you're actually losing some, you're missing an opportunity, is what you're missing to really get a full, well-rounded research. And research really, is it for someone else or is it for you? It's for you. You're just sharing your findings. And by writing something out, that's what tells me that you really understood it. What did you gain from your research? I am not the person that I want me regurgitated back to myself. I don't like it. But I've had kids that would do that in the past, and they'll use some of my idioms and phrasing, and I'm big in metaphors and stuff like that. But I want to know what you think. I know what I think. I want to know what you think, because I learn a lot from you guys as well, and gaining different perspectives and all that good stuff. All right, steps to seeking value complexity. Reflect on what you observe, examine issues from multiple points of view. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by just narrowing it down to two. Ask issue-based questions. Try to put into words questions that will help you explore why things are the way that they are. Again, when you're brainstorming on that list, that's where all that stuff goes. And that's what's going to start directing your research. Most people freak out about research papers because it's that big thing. Just like when we did the online library and you put in that topic and you get like 3 million hits and you're like, oh my gosh, this is too big. And you just don't know what to do with it because it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. That's why you have those search engines where you can narrow it down and you're looking to trend those things down to you where you can get into a workable and more focused information to choose from. Well, the same thing is with writing. If I gave you the topic of, capital punishment, that's a big topic. That's a big topic. And there are some different, views on that. Immigration. Okay, well, there's different perspectives. There's the government perspective, the people who are trying to get into our country, that's their perspective, the border towns that it affects, um, the citizens, the law enforcement. There's a lot of different perspectives how people will see something. Human rights activists, they're going to have a different perspective, you know? And I'm not saying that there's one that's right and the others are wrong. I feel like when we're synthesizing, it's about coming up with solutions that will address the, the situation. You're going to have a social injustice project at the end of this semester. And that's really what that is. Looking at the different perspectives of how it affects whatever that social injustice is. And based on that, what would be a viable solution that you're coming up with and presenting it? That's critical thinking. But we also remember, guys, you're tomorrow's lawmakers and decision makers. And it's not always going to be someone else's job to do that. And if you just sit back and say, oh, well, I'll let them handle it, that can be dangerous. Turn on the news. Look at your representatives. Get involved. What's their angle? And the moment that you step out of the conversation, that means you're allowing someone else to make those decisions for you. And that can be extremely dangerous if you just step out. That's why it always bothers me when people don't vote. This is your right. People died to give you that vote. They saw the worth of the citizens being able to run their country and to give them that voice. Don't take that lightly. And your voice is important. Every vote matters. Depending, regardless of which side that you're on, if that's based on your personal ideology, the research that you've done, and this is the best person. You're never going to meet any candidate that really checks every box. I'm just going to be real with you. But there are going to be some people that are going to align with what you believe better than others, and let your voice be heard. The moment that you don't vote, you can't complain about what's going on. And you could have actually changed that tide by becoming a part. I strongly encourage you guys to get involved that way. And writing is the same way. What you have to say can influence people. Just make sure that there's truth involved and really what it is. And sometimes the truth is ugly. And sometimes the truth is sometimes what we want to hear. But I'll tell you what I've always told my kids, my children, and then my students, you don't have to like the answer, but it doesn't mean it's not the right one. And again, there's some topics that are very touchy. Human trafficking, it's ugly. And sometimes we just don't want to face it. But that's someone's child. Somebody's got to do something. Someone's got to stand up for our children, for innocence. We're called for that. Academic writers see writing as a conversation. We've already really talked about that. High value on the belief that good, thoughtful ideas come from conversations with others. I like that. I'm going to read that again. High value on the belief that good, thoughtful ideas come from conversations with others. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. You're getting a different perspective. That's valuable, folks. Just so valuable. Empathy. The characteristic that makes for effective oral conversations are also in play with effective academic conversation. Empathy, respect, and the willingness to exchange and revise ideas. Now, empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. Sympathy is, man, I feel really bad about you. I'm sorry. Sorry that happened to you. Empathy means that you are able to relate. Kind of an extreme on this one, but when someone has lost a spouse, um, empathy is that, let's say, this other person, they've gone through the same thing. They've lost a spouse as well. They can empathize with that person who's going through that and speak into that. Someone who's gone through divorce, I can empathize with that person because I've gone through that myself. And empathy means I'm hearing you, I'm walking alongside you, and we can help one another travel this path. People don't want sympathy. Some people, they just don't want it. They've had some hard knocks. The last thing that they need is somebody just feeling sorry for themselves. Empathy is different. Empathy means that you're hearing them and that you're walking alongside them, rather than just that. Sometimes that flippant, well, I'm really sorry that happened to you. You know, thanks. What did that do? Nothing. Steps to joining the academic conversation. Be receptive. This is in one of the blue boxes, by the way. If you're in fourth edition, it's page 11. Didn't bring my other box over here. It's closer to the end of the chapter. Be receptive to ideas of others. Be respectful of the ideas of others. Engage with the ideas of others. Be flexible in your thinking about the ideas of others. Does this sound familiar? It's under respectful communication. And again, if you dig your heels in on whatever it is and you're not willing to hear someone else, really, you're the loser in that one, because you know they could be bringing a life experience that you haven't even thought about. Again, when you're being respectful, it does not equate to agreement. I need to stress that to you. Hear what they have to say. It could give you a different perspective. That's really cool. But at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with it. It's okay, because you have different life experiences and different beliefs, or what have you. We've got to learn how to play with other people in the sandbox, and that's a part of it. All right, next topic. Academic writers understand that writing is a process, and I think I've pretty much proven that to you. Never turn in a first draft, ever. You really are hurting yourself. Now, one thing, this is where I'm going to institute my editing, and you do need to know these. There's three things that I always preach regarding the writing process. Like I was saying earlier, when you're writing and you've been looking at a computer screen, your mind will start to autocorrect because you know what you're trying to say. And small things will actually, you're just going to overlook them because you've been looking at the screen. So when you're writing and you've gotten through, get up, you'll get a cup of coffee, hello, and step away. You need fresh eyes. Okay. So go get a cup of coffee, come back, and then read it. Okay. That's going to pick up some errors. I'm going to tell you the one that's going to pick up about 80 to 90% of the errors, though. Again, I'm old school, but I do believe it's helpful. Print off whatever it is that you've written. Get your marking pen that is in a contrasting color in your hand and read what you've written out loud exactly the way that you have written it. If you have a period, stop. If you don't stop. If you have a comma, pause. If you don't have a comma, you don't pause. Just in that little piece there, that's going to say if you have short, choppy sentences, it's going to tell you that, hey, I need to revise because I need each sentence to flow easily into the next. So if every time you're reading, you're having to stop because you've made these short, choppy sentences, that's not a flow of easy. Remember, I'm looking for an easy read. Think about the things that you've read that you've liked. It wasn't short, choppy. So don't do that. Commas. We are all comma queens and kings. Love the comma, but when we're originally writing, sometimes we're putting those commas in, and a lot of them really are not necessary. Um, when you read, it will actually present that to you. Remember that you are fluent in the English language. You have either heard this language or spoken it since the day you were born. Most of you. I think I have one person who is an international student, but I've taught international students, and they usually have a actually, I hate to say this, but a better foundation in the mechanics of the English language than our native speakers. But what we have going for us is that we've heard this language, regardless of whether you choose to use an everyday vernacular where they have all those different sayings, different idioms, and they've changed, you can tell the difference about English that is spoken well and not. You do. You can tell when somebody's butchering the language, and you can tell when somebody who knows how to speak. All their ideas are flowing from one idea to the next because you can hear it. So when you are reading your writing out loud, if it doesn't sound right, it isn't. I put parentheses around the areas that are questionable. Okay. Do not fix it right at that point, by the way. When you're reading it out loud, you're making notations. This doesn't sound right. I'm going to put parentheses around it, put a little question mark. It will pick up misspelled words. Now, you may not know that word, something's wrong with it. You may not know how to fix it on some of the words. So you circle it. Go look it up. Seriously, 5 seconds, you can do that. It will pick up awkward phrasing. It will pick up redundancy. Redundancy, you're using the same word or phrase pretty close together. What happens with redundancy is that it will take our mind and it will shift it to the redundant word or phrase, and then all the other stuff goes into the background, which is really the important stuff, and you've shifted that focus. So you want to make sure that you fix that. Typically, when you're using redundancy, because it's the same word or phrase, it means that those sentences have something in common. What are you trying to say in those 3 sentences? Make a better sentence that combines those ideas much better. Okay. And rephrase it. Don't just chop out the word, rephrase it. Remember, you want easy read. You want each sentence to flow easily into the next. It will show, with awkward phrasing, it will show abrupt shifts. So if you're reading a paragraph and then all of a sudden you read the sentence that has nothing to do with what you've read, you need to put parentheses around that and say move, put a question mark behind it. That's a part of the editing process. Editing is when you're identifying issues that need to be fixed. Revision is when you're actually fixing them. Okay, so the editing is identified. So anything that stands out, if you're looking at it, you're like, wow, this would be better placed somewhere else. But I can tell you, when you read your writing out loud exactly the way that you've written it, it will pick up about 80 to 90% of the errors. Does it take a little bit of time? Yes. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It will pick up tense disagreement. If you're starting a paper in present tense, the whole thing has to be in present tense. If you are in past tense, something that's already happened, the whole paper has to be in past tense. And I've had students, I'm not kidding you, that will have past and present tense in the same sentence. It's not going to read well because audibly it doesn't sound like it goes together. Put a parenthesis around it and fix it. What I would usually say is whatever you start your paper in, present or past tense, that's the one you want to stay in. What I would do is once I got back to my computer, after I have finished reading the whole paper out loud and making my marks, I'll go back in, and at the top, I believe it is in the top right hand, it's called find on a Word document. Type in is. Okay, and then type in was. One is present tense, one is past tense. And fix those things. Put in, different past tense. Has, had, and see what happens on that. But you'll be able to hear it because there's something that's not going to jive with what you're reading, and so you need to make sure that you're identifying that. Okay. My last one is, so the first one is get up, go get a cup of coffee, come back, get some fresh eyes on it. That will pick up some errors. The next one is read your writing out loud exactly the way that you have written it, and that will pick up about 80, 90. The last step is have someone else read it. Have a parent, a trusted person that you know writes well, okay? Or the writing lab. The writing lab is a phenomenal resource. People who work in the writing lab are not there by happenstance or just because they choose to be in the writing lab. These are people that have demonstrated that they write well and they know what they're talking about. And so they're a great set of eyes. This is a couple things that I want to caution you with on when you have someone else read your writing. One, it is not their job to fix your writing. It is their job to identify. Going to speak to those who will have their parent read it. For one, if they identify something, one, be nice. You asked them to read it. Don't argue with them. Why did I make that? Just say, okay, just can you mark it, and then I'll go back and work at it. And remember, when someone else is reading it, you are at the end of the day, you're the author. It's your baby. You always have the choice to accept or not accept whatever they're saying to you. Okay. But if someone is giving their time, don't insult them and get angry with them because they're identifying things. Please be respectful. Secondly, the other thing with parents is we love our children and we want to help them. And sometimes parents can be a little overzealous and then they want to rewrite it for you. That is not their job. And I'm going to tell you why. And some friends are also will do that as well. They are robbing you of the opportunity of learning how to fix your own work. You're not always going to have your parent there or your friend there to fix it. So you have to be posture yourself in a position where you are correcting your own work. And all you need from them is to identify. Sometimes you may need to remind them, hey, can you just identify those things? Just you put a bracket around a section that needs to be reworked or whatever. But have another set of eyes on that. I will tell you this, especially in your professional career, there's something very important that I need to get out. I'm not just going to have one person look at it. I'm going to have a couple people look at it. Okay. To make sure that there wasn't anything that I missed. I phrased that could be confusing. Again, remember, sometimes in our head, we know what we're talking about. It's a matter of getting it put into writing what you're really wanting to communicate for clear and concise communication. So, misspelled words, because you've been looking at it. So those are my three go-tos as far as when you're editing, that editing so you can go back into and revise. Okay. There's steps to collecting information and material. Mark your text as you read. That's annotation. List quotations you find interesting and provocative. Oh, annotation. List your own ideas in response to the reading or readings. That's taking notes. Now that's a little bit different. I will usually do that on something else. Again, keep your notes abbreviated, just like with those outlines, keep them abbreviated. You really want to save the opportunity to expound on those ideas as you're doing your rough draft. So keep them abbreviated. Sketch out the similarities and differences among authors whose work you plan to use in your essay. There are different things. You probably did something like a Venn diagram in high school with the circles. You had the two circles, and then there was like this piece where they kind of overlapped. That's the way that you can do it. I would usually do this for arguments, things that they're specific to, and then the two that they're kind of similar in. Academic writers reflect. Think about what you're saying. What did you learn? What did you retrieve from it? Just like I told you guys in class, your concluding paragraphs need to be substantial. Research is extremely important. But it's the outcome and what you retrieve from it. That's the most important. If you read something, didn't get anything out of it, it was kind of like, oh, that's sad. What's the point? Waste of time. So you really want to make sure that, if you're doing something, there's always something that you can learn. Always, always. There's some things with reflection and writing, focus on different types of knowledge, the content, the strategy, procedures, and conditions. You do want to kind of read through that. I think that rounds out chapter 1. Chapter 2, from reading as a writer to writing as a reader. I want you to think about that. from reading as a writer to writing as a reader. For one, reading as a writer is that you are trying to engage with what they're saying, and writing as a reader, meaning you're writing in a manner that you want it to be received in. Okay. It talks about annotation, which we've talked about. You definitely want to read through that. There's some bullet points. It's page 39 in the fourth edition. What arguments is the author responding to? Is the issue relevant or significant? How do I know what the author says is true? That's a good question. Is the author's evidence legitimate? Is it sufficient? Is it sufficient? Do they have a lot of stuff that's going to back them up on what they're saying, or does it feel kind of thin and not really substantial? So that's actually a good point. Can I think of an exception to the author's argument, and what would the counter argument be? Definitely want you to read through that section because that's very important. Reading as a writer, analyzing the text, it kind of goes through that rhetoric. So we talked about that. You're performing a rhetorical analysis. We will be doing that next week where I'll be filling that out. Now, I will tell you on chapter 2, we're not, I think in the fifth edition, it goes into the actual logical fallacies. I want you to hold off on that because we are going to delve into that next week. Okay. I want you to go a little bit farther, identifying the situation. Words you need to know, situation, what moves the writer to write. Why are they doing what they're doing? Purpose, what's the purpose? You do need to know the difference between claims and evidence. Claim is kind of like your topic sentence. This is what they're stating. This is one of their key points. Evidence is what's supporting that claim. That's why they're making that claim, is because of the evidence. I want the yin yang of it. Your thesis statement. You need to know what a thesis statement. It is the purpose of the entire paper. A topic sentence / claim is the purpose of that paragraph or that idea that you are discussing. And that whole paragraph needs to deal with that particular claim. They talk about main claims and minor claims. Audience, we talked about that. Who you're writing to. You need to write to who is going to be receiving it. Genre of writing. That's genre is like different types of writing, just like you have genres of literature. You have history, you got science fiction, historical, biographies, autobiography. You've got a lot of fiction, nonfiction, that kind of thing. Those are genres. Writing genres are rhetorical analysis, or like analysis, but even under analysis, that kind of breaks out a little bit, especially on the literature part. You have arguments, you have synthesis, research, evaluations, proposals. You guys will be writing a proposal. My 101 is the one that writes evaluations, even though if you've never written an evaluation, you really kind of want to read on that because it's important skills to know. Talks about the steps of analyzing text rhetorically. I do not, for those of you guys who are in who have the fourth edition, do not go into the rhetorical analysis stuff as of yet because we will be delving into that next week. So that kind of rounds that out, really kind of getting that terminology up to that point, which means in the fourth edition, you guys are stopping at the steps to analyzing a text rhetorically, which will be on page 48 for you guys. So for those of you who are in the fifth edition, I do want you to stop at that piece of it. I do not want you to go into the actual logical fallacies because that is a conversation all on its own. I hope that was helpful. So your assessment this week will definitely be on this material that we talked about in this video and in your textbook. If you haven't done your textbook, you got it. If not, I have given you the highlights of this, so I would look up those concepts. The bigger picture here, guys, is yes, this is vocabulary. Yes, you need to know it. The big picture is I want you to understand it because these concepts are not going to go away. As academic professional writers, you do need to keep these things in mind. And it's not going to stop with college. It's going to go into your careers. So just be really mindful of that. If you have any questions, let me know. And I hope you guys have a fantastic day. And I will see you guys in class. Have a great day.